welcome to Stoughton Politics with this guy. I'm your host, Noah Beit Aharon, and today I am interviewing Piper Slowinski, who is a town meeting representative and possibly some other things that we're going to hear about. So, first, why don't you tell me, how long have you been in Stoughton? Have you been here all along?
Thanks for having me here, Noah. First of all, just appreciate it. Appreciate the invite. My name is Piper Slowinski, use she or they pronouns, and I've been in Stoughton, since 2014, so what's that, 13 years at this point? Partner and I have lived in a couple places during our time here, but it's kind of wild to think it's already been 12 years.
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, wow. So did you come, for work? What brought you here?
Yeah, so we, both my partner and I are not from the area originally.
Okay.
I grew up in New Jersey, partner grew up in Connecticut.
Okay.
After we met in college, after that we lived in Connecticut for a few years, but then I got a job at a nonprofit in Boston, Partners for Youth with Disabilities, working in youth mentoring program, youth work.
Oh, that's awesome.
So when we first moved to the area, lived in Quincy, but then shortly afterwards moved to Stoughton, in part because nonprofit salary. This was an area where we could find affordable housing that worked for us, that was easy commute into the city. And we also really loved access to the outdoors and just be able to So it took us, we kind of settled here, didn't expect to be living in Stoughton for 13 years, I suppose, but have really put down roots and just come to love the local community. And
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And how long have you been involved in politics here?
Oh, goodness, only the past few years. Got involved in town meeting been through 2 town meetings, so I was elected 2 years ago to town meeting. Frankly, took a while after living in here to figure out how to get involved in the town. Knew some of our neighbors that have been in town meeting, and hearing them talk about it was always really interested in getting involved. But it wasn't until we made some close friends within the local queer community that some other folks that were already town meeting members that kind of made us the pitch to get involved and helped to give us the idea of how to fill out the papers, what you needed to do, and
Yeah, because I had noticed from town meeting that you seemed very well acquainted with procedure, and I was like, okay, Piper either is an incredible overachiever who researches everything deeply, or just really knows what she's doing.
That's a little bit of my neurodivergence showing through, and that if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it well, and I really want to know the rules of how something works and is structured. And so, I've only been involved in the past 2 years, but bought myself a copy of Town Meeting Time relatively quickly after joining, and friends through the local queer community with our deputy moderator, Carmel Druz, and so talking with her, just getting to know a little bit more of the ins and outs of Town Meeting Time. Just, I don't know, I get my nerd on with that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So tell me a little more about your involvement with the local queer community, because you're one of the organizers of Rainbow Nights, yes?
Yes, yeah.
So tell me all about Rainbow Nights.
A little bit right here.
About the merch.
A little bit of merch, a little bit of representation right here. So the Rainbow Nights, we are a new Stoughton area 501c3 nonprofit. We're founded, just got our determination letter back earlier this year in January. So brand spanking new.
Yeah.
And our mission, our goal, our work is to help support, nurture, and connect the local LGBTQIA plus community, the local queer community in the greater Stoughton area. So it's kind of spun out of, for many years, we've been organizing Stoughton Pride in Stoughton. That this was, I think, our 5th year doing it this past June. And we had been organizing that for many years under another local nonprofit, the Stoughton Diversity and Inclusion Organization, SDIO. Okay. It's another wonderful organization to folks out there. Encourage y'all to check them out, get involved. But we were getting to the point where we were a little bit larger. We had a lot of groups of organizers that want to do more year-round queer programming. So we figured, why not spin off into our own nonprofit? We could both seek out similar funding opportunities and both support one another, but have a larger ability to do more local queer programming. So
fantastic.
We We had Stoughton Pride this past June. It's our largest and biggest one yet. We had close to 400 attendees. We had karaoke the night before.
I was there.
You were there. It was wonderful. At Toffee Social right downtown. So wonderful host for us. We filled the space and brought the place. It was rocked the place all night. And we're looking now and talking about year-round programming. So we're going to be doing a queer prom in this upcoming fall. Hot off the presses. We just kind of figured this out earlier this month. And we're going to also be working on developing a program for more like regular community events. If people want to propose like a hiking event or a board game night or other opportunities, looking for ways that we can promote them and bring people together.
That's fantastic.
So
yeah, because when I saw on Facebook that karaoke was going to be happening, I reached out to Dex Lanson and it was like, hey, is this the kind of event that we should come to as allies, or the kind of event that we should leave to the community because it's not our event? Or is it, there's always a tension if you want to be very supportive and you might have friends who are already involved, a tension between wanting to show up in force and make the community feel like it's really supported by its neighbors, and not wanting to, step on people's toes and on in-group events. Are most of your events kind of with the goal of getting community involvement? Or how is your community been navigating that tension, or your organization rather?
Great. That's a really great question. And frankly, we really appreciate you and other allies in the community, being involved in our events, being connected, and the entire idea of part of the reason behind forming this community, forming this nonprofit, was the idea that in the suburbs, especially, it can be a lot harder for folks to find other local queer folks near them, to build that local community, to have that support network. But also can be really hard and isolating in the community to feel like you are an outsider, you don't belong, you're not connected in with the community around you and such. So the idea it's both of those pieces are incredibly important to the mission and the work that we're doing. And so we want to connect local queer folks with one another and to develop that sense of community, but also want them to feel connected with the community, to know that they have supportive allies and neighbors and people who are there for them, going to show up for them, going to attend events and be there in lockstep with them. So all of our events in general are just open to folks that want to attend and be involved and connected, and haven't really drawn a distinction about hey, this is a space for allies or not, or whatnot. It's more about I think the folks who want to attend and be in place. We had a large public book club event also in June at the Stoughton Public Library, and it was again a mix of allies, a mix of community members, and a chance for us to all connect, talk about a wonderful queer book, Hijab Butch Blues, and to dig into the discussion, just get to know one another a little bit more. So we're hoping to do more things like that going forward.
That's fantastic. I had read somewhere, I don't even remember where, probably just some random person posting online, that that one of the reasons that back when we were in high school that Gay Straight Alliance was pitched as Gay Straight Alliance was because they wanted people who considered themselves straight, or at least who wanted others to consider them straight, to feel free to join the community and help each other out. And if that meant that some people who were not out yet, but still were curious or still wanted to learn more about the community and feel less isolated, if they wanted to come as a straight, then it also was more welcoming, even to people who were not straight. including straight people was a good way of of welcoming everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for many years, I considered myself an ally to the queer community before I didn't realize or come out as bisexual or trans until I was well into my adulthood, until into my 30s or so. Didn't know that part of myself. And so I was just a really good ally for many, many years before I fully kind of unpacked all that other things. It's like, oh, wait, no, actually, I actually am bisexual. I actually am trans, and like went through that own little journey myself. But like, so yeah, it's important to have, for, like you said, like for many reasons, for whether for the folks that are going through their own journey, just not there yet, also just to build those connections across identities and help people bridge understanding with one another.
That's great. Yeah. You know, it's as a parent, you do a lot of work to sort of decide how are you going to raise your kids, and what do you want them to know, and what do you want them to understand about the world around them. And it's been very important to us to teach our kids inclusivity, not just by saying, you know, here are some people who are different from you, but you should also be nice to them, but also saying, and it would be okay if they weren't different from you, right? It would be okay if you were also a member of that community in the in-group, because that is a fine way to be, right? And, you know, even for those of us who, like me, the sort of entirety of my gender journey has been, you know, I was raised as a boy from infancy, and every time I examined that, I was like, yeah, that sounds right. You know, like that was it, right? But like, that's still, like, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't examine it. It's just many of us, when we examine it, we're like, yeah, I'm fine with that. You know, if I want to do activities that the greater society considers less masculine, you know, if I want to do more child nurturing and more cooking and cleaning, right? Then, you know, I've always been comfortable with, like, yes, I'm a man and I'm also doing those things, because there's nothing particularly gendered about these activities except what we decide to put on them. But, you know, a lot of people have very complex feelings around it, and it's, I think it's important for us to kind of tell each other that it's okay to be, you know, questioning whatever you were brought up with. We're living in a moment, just overall politically, right, where there is a intense obsession, especially on the male side, an absolute obsession with what is maleness, and, you know, what, you know, there are people who talk about masculinity as, like, you know, how dare others discuss toxic masculinity, because there's nothing toxic about, and then a whole array of fairly toxic ideas about, you know, the subjugating women and sexual minorities. Like, you know, people are posting weird stuff about how, like, if you don't eat meat, then you're not masculine enough, or, you know, if you pee sitting down, then you're, like, not and it's like, why are you policing our own gender so much? Why is this so important to you? You know, wouldn't it be easier for you, like, conservative, you know, cisgendered heterosexual person, wouldn't it be easier for you to just be, like, okay with other people's feelings? Like, and so, you know,
absolutely. And I think, you know, we have a tendency in our society to I think, be sometimes a little glib, and when we're talking about men and masculinity and such. There's this idea that because historically, like, when we talk about, like, privilege, marginalization, et cetera, you're talking about experiences of marginalization and whatnot, that, like, there tends to be a lot of, like, oh, men have historically been like the dominant like gender and such, been privileged in many ways, had all these advantages, yada yada, and such, which I think we like that's just very much in the discourse and such too, which all can be true. And also these days, especially the conceptions around masculinity, the way that we talk about it and the way that we reinforce and like police it, like can also be really damaging and hard for many men to like live through, to experience, have to navigate, having these intense there's just frankly a lot these days that like the divisions that we put between genders, the hyper like fixation on policing is harmful for everyone in terms of mental health, in terms of feeling like how am I being masculine enough? Am I being like having to being policed by others? This idea of like if you're masculine, you're not really supposed to like have close friendships with others or as much, right? Or, like that you're just supposed to be a lone wolf and like and self-sufficiency and all these things, which can lead to people being isolated and alone and leads to all these things we're seeing within young men these days of just like increased rates of depression and isolation, and that's huge. Like, so I really appreciate hearing you say and talking about the example of like examining your own gender and like thinking that through. Like, I think it's really important for all cis people, for everyone, to at some point or another in their life just take a little stock and step and be like, hey, like let me examine my gender. What do I like? What don't I like about it? And what do I want to like, masculinity, femininity, whatever your gender presentation might be. Like, what are the parts you like and don't like? And being able to have that freedom and flexibility to be like, say, yes, I am a woman, I'm a man, but like these parts of it aren't for me at the same time. Myself, I'm a trans woman. But there's many parts of femininity that I don't also subscribe to. I really don't, after trying during early in transition to like get on the whole makeup train, like just never stuck with me. It just never stuck with me. So I don't as much these days. So that said, I really enjoy having long hair and other parts of like feminine presentation that I very much enjoyed. So it's, a matter of like picking, choosing, finding the things that work for you, and like making your gender yours.
Thing that cisgendered people are doing, right? It's like, there are cisgendered women who love makeup, and there are cisgendered women who do not love makeup. And like, I grew up in a makeup-less household, and my mother and sister are both very cisgendered people, but they were not into makeup, and that was just like, okay, that's just a way to be, right? And so I sometimes wonder if there's sort of pressure when you're first starting out on that journey to explore all of the things and try to be into them all. And it's like, that's
for sure
not how anybody works.
For sure. No, whether that is just like, there's a lot of like, not to go, I don't know, deep down the rabbit hole of transition stuff, but glad to absolutely share. But like early transition for me, and then I think also for many trans folks, it can be a process of like, you number one are like reconceptualizing your personal like definition of like what works for me for gender, what do I like, but also trying to figure out like what even is gender to begin with. And like it's a very complicated thing, which is, as you said, like it's a nebulous concept once you start to really like delve into it and things. So but there's a lot of like early on in transition, I very much skewed more hyper feminine, trying out the makeup, trying out wearing dresses all the time, skirts all the time. These things I always held myself back from, giving myself permission to lean into and find out what I enjoyed and liked. And then while doing it, I kind of realized it was a process of like chasing your joy a little bit, chasing your, I think when many people talk about transition, there tends to be, or trans people in general, tends to be a focus on dysphoria. Those experiences of like, I am doing this because I self-loathe, I don't like myself. There's this like, and there are like dysphoria is a huge part of the trans experience of just like not feeling right in your body. But I think in many ways, what was more important for me, for my gender journey, and I think, again, for me, but I think for many other trans folks as well, is like joy and discovery and leaning into like finding the things that like make you a little bit happy inside and light you up when you like first time you put on a dress and spin around and feel the dress spin around and you, just that little feeling of joy. And that was my guidepost for my transition of like, as I was going through what was bringing me joy, lighting me up inside, and chasing that feeling further and further.
That's right.
And
that's a nice thing for cisgendered people to explore too, right? Like, what is the part of your gender identity that you really like? That like, what are the parts of this that are bringing you joy? Like, go ahead and lean into those things, and then, if it turns out that you're just not a gym rat and you don't want to be, ripped, like, that's also okay, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I do not want to make this show entirely about the transgender experience, but it was a thing because I've spoken to my parents who are, not remotely conservative, and yet, like many people in their generation, are less understanding of what's going on here in society. And, I spoke to them about, their feelings / my feelings about people we've known who've transitioned. And I said to them, every time that I find out that a new friend has come out, because there's always, you get to know a lot of people over the course of your life.
Yeah.
And if you're still even vaguely connected with most of them, you will end up having friends from high school or from whatever who have recently transitioned or not so recently transitioned. And I was telling them, every time I find out that a new friend is transitioning, it brings me such joy, because I have never known a person who seemed sadder after they transition, right? I've known a lot of people who just seemed generally unhappy in their lives, and I didn't know why. And then some of them transition, and suddenly they're happy, and it's like, how could I not be happy for them? Like, every time it happens, I'm like, I am so happy for you that, like, you are locating the source of your previous misery and eliminating it. Like, what joy that is. And so it's, I don't know. Different people have very different feelings about what it's like. It seems like the world is changing around you, and you don't know, what it means and what it means for you, and what it means, what you should tell your children about it. And it always seemed very simple to me that if your friend is unhappy and then they do something that makes them happy, and they're not, discovering themselves as a serial killer, if they're just doing some harmless thing that makes them happy, then, like, how could you feel anything but joy for them, right? I had another thought on that, and now I don't remember what it is, so I'm going to ask you about politics. Because one of the big events of this past town meeting was the noise bylaw.
Yes.
And I was really interested in how that whole thing progressed, because it was probably the most exciting part of the entire town meeting, because it moved and shifted over the course of a couple days, right? We had this noise bylaw that, as written, nobody was happy with, so they suggested an amendment to change the hours. Okay. And then you tried to also present an amendment to make some objective limitations on how noisy is noisy, because there's kind of a concern of you do want there to be a noise bylaw. You want it to be possible to call someone and say, "Hey, my neighbors are keeping me up till dawn, and it's not all right." Without, it shouldn't have to be a criminal issue for somebody to come by and say, "Hey, you guys, you have to turn the music off," right? Yeah. But at the same time, you also really don't want people to be like, how dare my neighbors own dogs?
Yep.
I'm gonna hit them with noise complaints. So you would, suggested this amendment to the bylaw to say, okay, but let's have some objective measures for how noisy is too noisy. And first, the town meeting did not let you present it. Like, you were not allowed to tell town meeting what it was about because it required a suspension of the rules because you hadn't submitted it in writing 48 hours in advance.
Yep.
And then you asked, okay, well, in that case, could we at least put this question aside until Monday so that it will have been 48 hours in advance, and then I can explain to you what the thing does? And town meeting said no, right? Which is, to be clear, it said no by not having a large enough majority because it required a two-thirds majority. And it did get a majority of people who wanted to hear what the amendment was, but it wasn't big enough. So then it was like, oh, great. Now we're voting on an amendment without even knowing what Piper's amendment does. And we voted it down just barely. It's like, okay, well, now there's nothing. And then come Monday, you were able to represent your amendment, and that passed. So just like there was this whole roller coaster of emotions going on. So tell me a little bit about it from your perspective.
God, it was wild, which is not a normal adjective I'd use for town meeting, I suppose, necessarily. But it was like, felt very like, I don't know, political thriller kind of thing at times. So it was entertaining. But this is my second year sitting on town meeting. Still a relatively new town meeting rep. So this is my first time putting forward a substantive amendment or suggestion before the body. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking and such. But I knew when I got the packet and was looking through the noise bylaw section, I had a feeling that like this was important for many folks, and especially it sounded like for many folks in some precincts. I think it was precinct 1 or so, that like some of the noise engine braking, jake braking sections that were in there, so the noise bylaws were really important for them. But I just had concerns about how vaguely it was written, as you said. This idea that I did a bit of research because, as I mentioned before, the way that my neurodivergence works, I want to like know something if I want to know it and do it well and make sure I have thoughtful reasoning behind what I'm trying to present to folks. And so by and large, when it comes to noise bylaws across municipalities, there tends to be two approaches. Like there is the original amendment was written in kind of the first approach, which is a more vague approach. Take it, noise bylaws in general can run up against like free speech concerns. Because again, at the end of the day, it is the government, local municipalities, trying to find a way to tell people like what, how loud, what kind of speech, how loud to be, what is allowed, and such not. So when noise bylaws, like when noise ordinances restrict like the types of speech that people can do, that is a problem, and that tends to run into issues. So a lot of the what is successful is vague depictions of just like too much noise, not really making a distinction of what kind of noise. This is the volume being too loud. That said, that vague approach can, while it is relatively common, still it can lead to some challenges, like and some like negative implications in terms of how it is then like implemented and used. It can make it like easier for folks to use it, as you said, like they don't necessarily like their neighbors, so they call on them more often, have the police come out to check on them more often for noise issues they may not call on another neighbor for. It's also, there's a lot of research showing that it can be a tool of gentrification, used against low-income communities, specifically communities of color, to like basically like, you don't belong in this neighborhood per se, and so we're going to call like if you're doing whatever it might be, like being a little bit too loud, we're going to say that's too loud and call the police on you for that.
Yeah.
So for for me, like especially moving to Stoughton, we moved here because, as I said before, it was a affordable area. And there's so much in the Boston that has and in Stoughton, since moving here, really gotten to know that there is some really strong working class roots here. Some families that have been here for many, many years and generations. And I want to that gentrification concern was definitely an issue for me, wanting to make sure that in so much of the Boston area, prices are going up in communities across the board and whatnot. And so wanted to make sure that we weren't giving another tool for gentrifiers or folks trying to push out lower income residents of color, immigrants in the community, folks that they just felt didn't belong necessarily in the community. Wanted to make it a little bit more rigorous, per se, so it couldn't be applied in a biased fashion. So that brings us to the second approach for how to noise bylaws, which is through decibels measuring. This is again relatively common practice. The example that I pulled our text from and many of the decibel measures from was from the city of Brockton, our neighbors, who passed noise ordinance a couple of years ago, I believe, or at the exact year, 2022, 2023, something along those lines. And yeah, it's basically saying, again, any noise that passes a certain measured decibel level would be in violation of the ordinance in that case. So it makes it more easy to apply across the board because you have a way to measure and determine what is too much noise. So that's what my amendment was trying to do. I wasn't quite quick enough getting it in the first time because we'd been on vacation the week before, and town meeting was moving a little faster than I expected, so I thought I'd have more time to put it together, and then all of a sudden I didn't. And I was like, oh, shoot. Okay. So the first couple of days of town meeting kind of lull you into thinking this is going to take forever because those first couple of days, it felt like we were inching through the articles. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, maybe I have 3 weeks left to work on this, right? So I can see how that would happen. Yeah, it snuck up on me a little bit. But we got it in. Didn't pass it, bring it before the body. But then when the noise bylaw failed at that time, my original idea was, okay, I'll rework this and I'll bring it back for the fall. We normally will have a special town meeting in November, so I figured at the very least I'll come back before the body again. I can make sure I can have some months to work on it. But another member of the body, a couple of folks actually over the weekend reached out to me and said that they were going to be bringing it forward.
John again? Zavino, maybe?
Yes. Yeah. John was the one that made the motion to bring it up again, and I was appreciative of having another opportunity to share about it, and that folks liked it. So yeah, we do now have a noise ordinance, a noise bylaw in our town for folks that you may not. I don't know how widely known that is. Folks that there are certain hours during the day that if your neighbors or someone else in the community is making too much noise, there is some legal backing to be able to call and say hey, can we check out and see can we measure and see if someone's making too much noise? I think it's from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., I believe, on weeknights, and then I think from 11 p.m. to I think it's 7 or 6 a.m. I forget exactly in the morning on weekends. A little bit later, and I think there's also an exception for after 8 o'clock. After 8 o'clock, in terms of using leaf blowers and other loud machinery or implements. I think it's after 8 o'clock to try to make sure that the people are still able to mow their lawns and everything in the summer. And
And is that I remember one of the issues that people brought up in their arguments against the amendment was, that would require our police department to buy, specifically calibrated noise things. Do you have a sense of whether the bylaw is enforceable yet? Are we going to have to come back in November and approve that the money for them to buy the tools to enforce it?
I'm honestly not 100% sure.
Okay.
I haven't filed with the police department and checked in. I don't remember if there was someone there at town meeting that was able to speak to it from the police. I feel like I recall they were hearing that there was a possibility that they would be able to fit it in under their budget, but like that we might hear it again in November. So I'm not 100%
Okay,
sure. So there was some following up, and we might.
The police department will probably get back to us, and we'll find out whether we need to approve funds or whether they were able to figure it out on their own. And there's a lot to be said for. Presumably, it is helpful to the police to be able to enforce a noise ordinance without needing to file criminal charges, right? Because that's kind of the thing that noise ordinances and bylaws do, right? Is that they create a civil fine so that the police don't have to determine, okay, is this obnoxious noise completely okay, or is it a criminal offense, which is kind of a very weird and strict binary, and you feel like there's a lot of gray area in between not at all a problem and I should arrest you for it. So it's very good to have an ordinance or bylaw that kind of covers the in between things where the noise isn't okay, but it's also not criminal.
Yep.
So that's very meaningful. The other thing that was really interesting to me about that whole process, the debate, the not being allowed to bring it up and then being allowed to bring it up, and that whole thing was that it really there's a lot of feeling in politics, especially at the national level, but really even here, there's a lot of this feeling that everything is about turnout and nothing is about persuasion, right? That there's no such thing as convincing someone who disagrees with you on something, which, while I am sometimes sympathetic to it in certain ways, is also a very cynical way to view other people, that there's no such possibility of convincing someone that you might have a point. Mm-hmm. And so it was very kind of life-affirming to see it go back and forth, really based entirely on persuasion, because there was no turnout difference. It was the same people in the room, right? It was literally just convincing people that first off, that the original version was not was too vague and would be dangerous as written, and then to convince them that with these added changes, it would be okay and good. And it was, there's something really nice about feeling like, yes, actually, if we talk about it, if we debate it, if we, give people a chance to have their voices heard and give other people a chance to listen, then sometimes you do persuade people. Sometimes someone who wasn't so sure and voted against it because, I don't know, it didn't seem right, hears you out and says, no, it's good. Right. And that was a really nice feeling. I feel like I don't get in politics often enough,
It's fair. No, I think I feel like that is something a little special about town meeting to some extent, or I think there is something to be said for local politics where the issues are so local and close to us that so many of the typical national partisan divides don't carry as much weight. There are definitely some times where you still feel that tension in the room from those. Yeah. But there's so many issues that it's just a matter of I definitely have been convinced in one way or the other myself, listening to people motivate one of the motions or explain from the town explains why they need X, Y, or Z, or have someone make a pushback or make some points about why something we should rethink things. It's town meeting isn't always that also, right. But I think we do get a lot more we do get those moments of that platonic ideal of debate and discussion, right, that we hope for in politics that isn't always what we're able to achieve, right. But we have a similar thing also with the school debate, because the turnout was not much higher in April than it had been the previous summer.
and yet the vote totals pretty much flipped, right? We had the school, debt exclusion had lost last summer by around 500, 600 votes, and not very many more people voted this time around, but this time it won by about 600 votes. And so it was also another one of those moments of feeling like, yeah, actually, if maybe when you do explain yourself well, when you do, go door to door talking to people, have conversations with them in person or online or on the phone, like sometimes people they are open to new information. It's not, we don't have to live in our cynical,
Yeah, I like to, I kind of think of it in this way, and this is part, in that like we as a society tend to really easily fall into the trap of like debate. And debate is very much like a us versus them. I need to convince the other person I'm right, you're wrong approach. And that so much of our, especially national discourse and politics, and like so much is like focused on that like team A versus team B, and as a sports match, who's going to win,
right,
and whatnot. Whereas like I think like where we can really like thrive as a community, as a town, in terms of bringing people together, is through more dialogue, which is like dialogue is really like very different from debates, in that it's really about like we're entering into a conversation to explain myself, where I'm coming from my perspective, and to truly hear and to listen to where someone else is coming from, to try to like understand and find some point of commonality between the two of you. It doesn't have to be that you don't have to agree with each other's points or positions, but like, is there some underlying value you both care about? Some point of connection, like where is the common shared humanity or that piece of connection between you two? And to not enter into this idea or assumption that I'm going to convince you that my way is right. I want to instead understand your position and where you're coming from. And I want you to better understand where I'm coming from. We don't necessarily have to end up agreeing, but just like being able to have that conversation, engage in that dialogue, can lead to people being more informed, can lead to people, sometimes they can change their minds in one form or another, and just at the very least having a better appreciation for each other and where we're coming from, and like why different people feel differently.
Yeah.
So I think there's too often not enough dialogue happening when we're talking about really challenging issues, and it's easy to fall into debate. But I think where we see that growth, that change, and the opportunity here on a local level, or like community level, is to engage in dialogue with one another, to like better understand our neighbors and be there and show up for each other. But yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the question that I've been calling the smackdown, because how can you be on a station called Smack and not make some kind of pun about it? And that is, what is something that has been bothering you politically on a local level or on a national level, just something that you wish you could really shake somebody and say, no, this is how it is. What's kind of your political rant, that then will get you going, when you're hanging out with your friends and you start ranting about politics. Like, what is that thing that you're always ranting about?
Oh, goodness gracious. It could be too many things, I suppose. Wow. Okay. I mean, like, the easy and obvious answer for me would be that, like, trans issues. I think, like, as a transgender person, the way we discoursing and talking about trans folks these days, and especially the laws being passed and around specifically targeting many trans youth and trans young adults, limiting access to healthcare and surgeries, is just hard to see and witness as a trans person, to feel that weight on a daily basis. I know many folks in our local community even that just have really hard, just the national discourse, the way we're talking about this, even though, we live in a very safe state here in Massachusetts, just knowing this is happening carries an intense weight and burden on many just trans people on the course of our lives. I know folks that have had to seek out additional mental health support, to step back from parts of their life to really care for themselves this year. They're just going through really hard times, largely like impacted by this weight that's happening. So the discourse really does have an impact on like individual people's lives in a real tangible way, that I think can be sometimes easy to forget when we're just like fighting in the political arena and such. I'm also autistic, and I think also some like the national discourse around autism and vaccines, and about how autism is created by vaccines. We need to find a cure for autism. Autism is a horrible thing.
Exactly. This notion that
if you're autistic, you will never find love, or you will never be able to hold a job or hold an affirming life. Like, well, I am here to say that I have a job. I have a loving partner. We've been married for 15 years last year, and it's another thing that's just very hard to see and witness. And
I mean, it. How could it not be, right? How could it not be hard to have a national dialogue that is essentially debating whether or not you or people like you should exist? It's like, well, we do exist. What do you mean, should we? It feels very, for lack of a better term, it feels very genocidal, right? To say like a certain class of people shouldn't exist. We should either prevent them from starting to exist, or we should do something about their current existence. And that's a really terrifying place to be in. And certainly as someone who maybe isn't in that particular community, but is Jewish and has, autistic friends and relatives, it rings all those same bells, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very scary time to be living in, to have people debating, whether or not you or people you love should be. Being is kind of existential.
And it's and it is definitely a challenge the disability community writ large has faced for many years. This isn't necessarily like, while the current escalation is new, like disabled folks and disabled advocates have been pushing for their rights to exist and to be, and to say like, to my
access
society. To access society, to be able to say that my life has value even if I am not able to work. Like there can be tied up like the capitalist world we live in, it's very easy, or capitalism definitely draws this line between you have worth as a person if you're able to work, and your worth is tied to how much you're able to work, how much you're able to contribute and add to society.
Where worth is counted in dollars.
Worth is counted in dollars, as opposed to just every person, every human individual has intrinsic worth and value. The fact that they are a person, a unique person identity in this world, and that has value in of itself. And so that's, many disabled advocates for many years have been saying like, I may not be able to work, I may not be able to, like, I fall outside the capitalist system in this way, but I still have value. I am pushing and fighting for our right to exist and to be in public spaces, to have access to be able to live affirming life.
There's, we recently had ReaderCon. The issues we were discussing is book bans and how they've been exploding and proliferating in recent years. And, so people were handing out flyers for Authors Against Book Bans. And there was someone from the ALA discussing it. The intellectual value of being able to pick up just the life-affirming value of being able to pick up a book and see some manner of your existence in it is very valuable. My kids have a picture book they absolutely love that I don't know if you're familiar with. It's called I Want to Be a Vase. and it's a delightful book. I want to say the author is like Richie Torres or something along those lines. But it's this lovely book about a plunger that decides that it's going to be a vase, and it wanders around the apartment, and various other implements are yelling at it that it can't that it can't do that. That's not its assigned purpose. And it's but it oh no, what will happen then? And then various household items are saying, well, I don't like doing what I do. I'd prefer to do this other thing. And it's a lovely book. It's a funny book. The kids loved it. And then I was talking to them a few weeks ago about the horrors of book banning, and they were saying, like what kind of, I was saying, there's this really nasty current of calling all books that have either gay or trans or some other queer messaging in them that is really just affirming, right? Mm-hmm. But calling all of them sexual in their so that they're no longer appropriate to children. And they were like what? And I was like, well, like that book that you love so much, because there's trans allegory in there, and there is nothing sexual about the plunger wandering around saying that it wants flowers on it, right? And yet you say, well, that's a trans message, and all trans messages are sexual and pornographic, and therefore not suitable to children. And this lovely children's book that every time they read it they laugh becomes something that has to be banned, that you can't possibly have in a school library. And so it's like it's a very weird time we're living in, and would be nice for people to chill out. Chill out and let your kids read whatever book they want to read.
Just chill out. I can get behind that rant right there. Yes.
Awesome. Let me see if there was something else that I particularly wanted to ask you about. Okay, what is something that you would like to say to someone brought you into the Stoughton Politics community, right? What is something that you would say to people who are maybe considering getting involved but don't want to end up yelled at on Facebook or whatever? What's your pitch? Like, why should we not be alone here?
Yeah. No, I love that. So if you are considering getting involved in town meeting, getting involved in local town politics and such, I think like in general, local town governments, it's about investing and caring about the town and community that you live in and that we're here for. It can be hard and challenging to figure out how to first get involved. It took us a good decade living in the town to first realize how is our town run? How do we get involved? It just feeling kind of nebulous, uncertain, unclear. And so if you are interested though in supporting our town and getting involved, reach out. I think reach out. I'd be glad to handle a message to help point folks in the right direction of where to go. If you're interested in being a town meeting rep, you can reach out to town hall. The clerk's office will be willing to also can show you, tell you, give you the necessary paperwork of how to file and become a town meeting rep. We're always needing more folks to sign up and to become interested in being town meeting reps. Especially encourage folks if you identify as queer, as a person of color, as other people, as immigrants to our community, other folks that would like to get involved. We speaking as we have a little queer cohort in town meeting of many of us that have gotten involved, and it's helpful to be able to be there as a voice to speak for the full range of our community. Wanting to make sure everyone's voice is brought in and heard in that space. And town meeting is a really it can be, it's a lot of time on evenings in May and a little bit in November each year, but it can be a really fulfilling way to feel like you're investing and caring for and helping steward your town going forward.
Yeah.
Here, I feel like so much more informed about our town now, just being involved, about like the things that are happening, the progress that's being made, the areas that were like things that are like in the works or coming up. And it's a way to, through like put amendments to the noise bylaw or other ways, you can, as an individual person, like have an actual real impact on our town, which is like, it's, but also if you're just like there for the first year and you're soaking it in and just like that's great too. Like it takes a while to get the feel for it. And so don't feel like you need to hit the ground running immediately with it either. Anyway, I don't know. That was a bit of a ramble.
No, I like that. And the thing is, the barrier to entry is not that high in our town. There are places where you would have to, where it would be more like running for the select board, right? Where you'd need to run a real campaign and whatever. But in order to join town meeting, and we still have, even after this year, where we had a huge influx of people running, and the town clerks were very excited that, or the people working in the clerk's office, they were like, wow, we might have a full ballot this year. We may finally fill all 168 seats. We didn't, right? We came close. We came pretty close. But even in my precinct 6, there's still one spot left, right? I was one of 11 people running for 12 seats. And so really all it took to get involved was 20 signatures, and that includes you and any adults you may be living with, right? It's really not hard to just, I didn't have to go like barnstorming, right? I knocked on the doors of like neighbors I already knew and asked them, would you be willing to sign this? And it was really just as simple as that.
Also, you can always reach out to the local precinct chair, and they're also willing generally to help people get signatures and to get involved.
Okay. So please do get involved. And thank you so much, Piper.
Can I make a last pitch?
Yes, go for it.
Just a quick pitch. If you are a Stoughton resident, if you identify as LGBTQIA+ or queer or an ally and want to be involved, please check out Rainbow Nights. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We have a Facebook group called the Rainbow Nights Guild. We also have a Discord community that we're working on building more of a local, and we're going to be doing more events. You can join our mailing list on our website. You can sign up for any of our socials to follow us as we're doing events. We also have merch available. But yeah, if you are local and queer and like needing community or feeling isolated or alone, reach out. We are here. We're building that. Again, relatively new. Myself and our other co-chair, Dax Lanson, I'd be welcome to talk with you and invite you in. So,
Perfect.
Thank you all thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Come on, sugar. Woo! Come on. All work it.